Chodesh Tov. Today, of course, is Rosh Chodesh Adar, and our sages teach us Misha Nichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha. When Adar, the month of Adar, begins, we increase our joy. Already here in Yerushalayim, the streets of Yerushalayim are filled with people starting to dress up in silly costumes. All the stores have these funny hats available to throw on our heads, and we know that a great part of the joy that we feel in Purim and the great part of the celebration is this idea of dressing up in costumes. Now, what is that all about? Why do we dress in costume on Purim? So the Megillah begins, the story of Purim begins with the royal banquet that Achashverosh the king throws for his entire kingdom. And our sages in the Talmud explain that that banquet was not only a great feast, but that great feast was actually served on the very kelim, the very vessels and utensils that were used in the Beit HaMikdash, the sacred vessels that had been stolen from the Beit HaMikdash, from the temple upon its destruction, were now used to serve that royal banquet. And Achashverosh himself, as the Megillah describes, comes to the banquet wearing lavish clothing. And our sages teach us that that lavish clothing was none other than the Bigdei Kahuna, the various uniforms and garments that the Kohanim, the priest, would wear as they did their sacred service in the temple. Well, the story doesn't end there, as we know. Ultimately, the Jews are saved, and Mordechai is restored to a position of nobility, due him as a Torah scholar. And what happens at the end of the Megillah? Mordechai is paraded through the streets wearing those same lavish garments. So the question has to be asked, how could Mordechai, who's a Torah scholar, who's a great righteous individual, who was not a Kohen, how could Mordechai allow himself to be paraded through the streets wearing the Bigdei Kahuna? It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So there's a beautiful answer to this question that's given by Rabbi Clonimus Kalman Epstein, the Me'or V'Shemesh, one of the great early Hasidic masters, the prime student of the Noam Elimelech, Rav Elimelech Legends. And the Me'or V'Shemesh explains as follows. He says, sometimes one needs to put on clothing that they would otherwise never be comfortable wearing. Sometimes one needs to put on a proverbial disguise, if you will, in order to allow blessings to come into our lives. And he cites two examples of this from the Torah itself. He says, if we look at the story of Yaakov Avinu, Jacob disguises himself as his brother Esav. He dresses himself up, so to speak. He puts fur on his arms so that his father Isaac would think that he is Esav in order for him to receive the blessing. And later on, just a few parshiot later, we read the story of Yehuda and Tamar, how Tamar disguises herself as a harlot in order to deceive her father-in-law Yehuda and bring continued life to their family line. Now, at first glance, says the Rebbe, both of these acts, the act of Jacob deceiving his father Isaac and Tamar deceiving her father-in-law Yehuda, both of these acts, says the Rebbe, seem at face value as terrible, horrible deceptions. But in reality, each of these acts of disguising oneself enables incredible blessings to come into the world and to each of their lives. So too, says the Rebbe, when we put on our costumes on Purim, we get out of our own space. We allow ourselves to step into a space which is unfamiliar to us, and in so doing, in transitioning from being in our comfort zone, we allow ourselves to enter into a space where blessings can come into our lives. So my blessing for all of us as we get ready for Purim these next 6 weeks, as we begin to don our silly costumes, that these costumes, these disguises, if you will, should be a source of incredible blessings to come into our lives as well. Chodesh Tov, everyone.